Welcome to the Layer by Layer Poetic Features for Psalm 15. Our goal is to reveal the distinctive beauty and power of the original text of Psalm 15 as the next best thing to knowing Hebrew yourself. The three poetic features are called the 10 requirements, from simple to complex, and not jumping to conclusions. The 10 requirements. Psalm 15 describes the kind of person who meets the requirements to dwell with the Lord, meaning to live under his hospitality and protection. These requirements appear across exactly 10 lines of poetry, recalling the 10 commandments, or 10 words of the Mosaic covenant. A distinctive feature of Hebrew poetry is the attention to balance of line length, verse length, and even the attention to the actual number of words and lines in a given unit. These were not poems that were heard just once for a surface-level appreciation. These were poems people recited, memorized, and pondered at a deep level, chewing over every part, including word count and line count. This means that the line count itself can be a poetic feature. The Hebrew hearer or reader, meditating on Psalm 15, would note that the body of the psalm, the actual contents of the moral requirements for dwelling with God, are contained within exactly 10 lines. The number 10 recalls the 10 commandments given to Moses. This has long been recognized. The Talmud even calls the psalm a summary of all the commandments. Poetically, the psalm acknowledges the 10 commandments as the foundation for living with God. It doesn't treat them as 10 discrete commandments to be kept in isolation, however. Instead, the psalm combines the various commandments in different ways as a poetic meditation for a narrower context than the original giving of the law. Whether Psalm 15 is a meditation for a Davidic king, as part of his own internalizing requirements for kingship, or whether it's a psalm intended for the whole congregation of Israel, it conveys the message that the entire law is the responsibility of this person, and that needs to be implemented in a very practical way. For this person, it's not an abstract integrity, but actual interactions with neighbor and friend, and those who come seeking help or financial assistance. Loving God and loving neighbors are inseparable. One loves God, gaining access to his hospitality, by loving one's neighbor. We'll now move to our second feature, from simple to complex. The grammar of Psalm 15 is highly expressive. The grammar in verses 1 to 3 is simple, straightforward, and repetitive. In verse 4, however, forms are mixed and the syntax becomes more complex. This complexity mirrors the reality that seemingly simple requirements, when combined with real life, can become very complex. The choice of verbal form provides a quick visual of this poetic feature. Verse 1 has exclusively one kind of verbal form, here translated with the helping verb may dwell, may stay. Verse 2 has another verb, here translated with the simple present tense, who walks, who does, who speaks. And verse 3, a third kind of form, here translated as a present perfect, has slandered, has done, has uttered. In verse 4, however, the forms start to be mixed. The syntax becomes more complex, such that it's a challenge to even know who's the subject and who is the object. It could be that the rejected one is despised in his opinion, or that the despised one is rejected in his opinion. The preferred understanding, the rejected one is despised in his opinion, and he honors those who fear the Lord, forms a chiastic pattern, mirroring the complexity of the meaning. Grammatically, it is not easy to determine who is the subject and who is the one rejected or despised. In real life, it can be equally difficult to determine who is doing the despising or rejecting, and who is the one despised or rejected. The poetry thus transitions from grammatical simplicity to grammatical complexity, providing a poetic picture of the reality of living with integrity. It starts with simple building blocks, but it quickly grows to be very complex. The importance of integrity is not diminished. It becomes all the more important the more complex life becomes. Now, our next poetic feature, not jumping to conclusions. There are several phrases that are challenging to interpret and only become clear in the context of the psalm. If one were to see the Hebrew out of context, one could come to very different conclusions of what it means. The implicit challenge to the reader is to not jump to conclusions, but to interpret everything within the context. At least 5 different phrases could have more than one meaning. One who speaks truth sincerely could equally be read as one who speaks truth in his heart, which could be someone who speaks truth to himself, but not necessarily to others. The person could jump to the conclusion that he could technically fulfill this requirement by being honest to himself, but the person with integrity will recognize the full intended meaning, to speak sincerely both publicly and privately. He has not uttered a taunt against his relative, could equally, in fact more naturally, read, he has not borne reproach on behalf of his relative. If the latter, it would mean this person has refused to stand in solidarity with a relative who has suffered harm. In verse 4, the rejected one is understood as a person rejected by God. If God has rejected a person, then those who follow his ways need to equally reject, or despise within an honor and shame context, that rejected one. The Hebrew could also be taken, however, as not referring to God who first rejected, but rather this person. It could be that this person, described in the psalm, chose to reject a social enemy, who was consequently despised by others. In that case, this person, described by the psalm, would have started a chain reaction of hatred within society. Also in verse 4, having sworn so as to harm himself, he will not change, refers to keeping one's promises even when painful. It might also be read, however, as when he has sworn so as to harm someone else, he will not change, meaning that if he foolishly promises to do harm to someone, his integrity will ensure that he carries through on the foolish promise. In verse 5, this person has not taken a bribe against an innocent person, meaning he's not received a bribe and thus perverted justice. The Hebrew could also be understood, however, as this person having not paid a bribe in order to help an innocent person. A reader could jump to the conclusion that this psalm is arguing that we should pay bribes, as long as they are for innocent people. In each of these cases, from the bare Hebrew, one might jump to the conclusion that the requirements are very different. Speaking honestly only to oneself is enough. Refusing to suffer reproach for a near relative is acceptable. Rejecting people so they are despised in society is appropriate. Doing harm is acceptable, as long as it was promised beforehand. And paying bribes is what ought to be done. One of the marks of integrity of the person who may dwell with the Lord is that he interprets all these things in context. He walks with integrity and does what is right. He will not do wrong to others, simply by jumping to conclusions. This has been the Poetic Features video for Psalm 15, in which we explore the natively Hebrew poetic nature of the psalm. Our overview video provides a coherent interpretation of the psalm, and our exegetical issues video discusses other scholarly views. All these videos are offered free of charge, thanks to the generosity of our donors. Please visit us at cdbr.org to learn more. Thank you.